I'd like to tell you about one of the most famous prophets of all time. His name was Elijah, and he was alive during the time of King Ahab. Now, King Ahab was not a good king. He did not walk with God. In fact, he instigated the worship of Baal. And so God had Elijah proclaim that there would be a drought. There would be no rain, not even any dew for years. And then God sent Elijah into hiding. Now, while he was in hiding, Elijah did a couple of things. One of the things that he did was give hope to a widow in the town of Zarephath. When he got there, she was collecting sticks to make the last meal for herself and her son before they died, because there was a drought going on. Elijah provided her with a bottomless jar of oil and a bottomless jar of meal so that they could have food until it started raining again. In fact, Elijah raises her son from the dead. It was part of a message that God is not the one to be feared, but God is the one who's a savior, who provides for the people who are faithful. Now, after the 3 years of drought, Elijah came back and he gathered all of the people, including King Ahab. And then he stood up in front of them and he said, if the Lord is God, follow the Lord. But if Baal is God, well, then follow him. And so there stood Elijah all by himself, the only prophet of God. And next to him stood 450 priests of Baal. So they made 2 giant piles of wood ready to make fires. They put a bowl on top of each one as a sacrifice. And each of them agreed that they would call on the name of their God. And the God that answered with fire would be the winner. Everyone agreed that this was a good plan. I don't know if it's a plan I'd go with today, but that's what they did. And the priests of Baal got to go first. They prayed. They prayed and they prayed and they prayed hours on end. They even drew blood from themselves as a way to try to appease their God, to try to get Baal to do what they were asking, and nothing happened. Then it was Elijah's turn. Elijah, he had a bit of a streak in him where he liked to be kind of ornery, and so he had them pour water on his wood. Not once, not twice, 3 times. The wood was soaking wet by the time that Elijah prayed to God. Wouldn't you know it, as soon as he started praying, lightning fell and lit that fire up. It consumed the sacrifice, it consumed the wood, and even burned up all of the water that had been dousing that wood. Needless to say, the people got rid of the priests of Baal. And from that time on, the rain came as it always had. But I have to tell you that King Ahab's wife, Jezebel, was a follower of Baal. She was the one who introduced Ahab to this God, and she did not like what Elijah had done and threatened him. And so Elijah ran for his life. He ran out into the wilderness, and he was terrified, and he was pretty sure that he was going to die, either from exposure or either at Jezebel's hand, until an angel spoke to him and said, "Go stand on that mountain over there, and God will pass by." And so Elijah, as always, did as God instructed. And as he was standing there, a strong wind began to blow up. And it was so fierce that things were blowing everywhere. Trees were bending over. In fact, rocks were splitting. It was so strong. But the Lord was not in that wind. And the ground shook and the earth quaked underneath Elijah. But the Lord was not in the earthquake. A great fire rose up and consumed everything around Elijah. But God was not in the fire. And then after that fire, there was sheer silence. And in that silence, a still, small voice spoke to Elijah. It offered him protection. It offered him purpose and direction, reassured him that God was on his side and would carry him through whatever was ahead. Elijah did many other things that I don't have time to tell you about, but I would tell you about his death. But Elijah didn't exactly die, at least not per se. After he blessed his apprentice Elisha, which is a little confusing, Elijah and Elisha, he passed on his mantle to Elisha, his apprentice. And as soon as he did that, a chariot of fire, driven by horses of fire, came down from heaven and swooped up Elijah, and in a whirlwind carried him back up to heaven. So in some ways, Elijah never really died, and the people of Israel today still wait for him to come back, to call the people back to faithfulness with God. But Elijah would not be the last voice to call people back to God. God sent many prophets over the years, some major, some minor. And I'll tell you more about some of those prophets in our stories to come.